Well, hello everybody. I am happy to be here in San Antonio, back to Military City. I spent most of yesterday spending time with the 25th Air Force, and that was an eye-opener for me. Before I get started, I'd like to extend my thanks to General Shea and Wood. Thanks for having me here, and the Afcea International Conference providing the opportunity to speak. It's not very often a fighter pilot gets invited to talk about cyber, so thank you in advance for your bravery. I'll be honest, I accepted the invitation, and then they told me I was following the Secretary of the Air Force. It was a surprise to know that right before I was getting on stage, they were going to give away a house and some awards to fantastic airmen, so what could be worse than that? Oh, I know. Lunch is a buffet, and it's immediately following my comments. By the way, that just cleared all the fighter pilots in the room. They're already in the back. A lot of distinguished visitors out here today. I won't name them individually because there'd be no time left for my remarks, but we have leadership from the highest echelons of the Air Force, along with a host of C2, ISR, and other cyber leaders. To the other military and industry partners in the room, thank you for the valuable products and services you provide. And finally, to everyone who helped set up the inaugural TechNet Air Symposium, thank you. The work that you do behind the scenes makes this possible. We have a diverse group of experts in the audience today. Experts from the intelligence community, such as 25th Air Force, the cyber community with 24th Air Force, as well as the traditional communications and IT field and numerous industry partners. I'm excited, as an introvert, that this opportunity and forum will allow us to share our diverse base of knowledge and information and different viewpoints on what we do in cyber and cyberspace. Combat Air Forces, otherwise known as the CAF, we have a viewpoint also, and sometimes it's a little different. So I'm here to discuss how that operator sees cyber fitting into the big picture. So let's get started on that. Before we get ahead of ourselves, I'd like to talk a little bit about Air Combat Command, or ACC, and the CAF, and how we fit into the DoD and the largest, or the bigger Air Force picture. Most people in the audience know that the Air Force has 5 core missions: air and space superiority, command and control, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, rapid global mobility, and finally, global strike. From those 5 core missions, the Air Force further defines 12 core functions to enable those missions. ACC, where I work, is the lead integrator for 5 of those essential functions that you see up on the slide now. Starting from the top left, command and control provides decision superiority through reliable and trustworthy communications and information networks to the Air Force and the Joint Force. Command and control links battle space information to warfighters and the warfighters to the decision makers by ensuring reliable communications and accurate real-time battlefield information through robust and survivable situations. This is a broad-reaching core function, and its missions range from directing the overall air war all the way down to the airmen identifying and targeting hostile aircraft and targets on the ground. Moving clockwise, we define air superiority as control of the air that permits friendly forces to conduct air, land, and sea operations, and at a given time and place without prohibitive interference by the enemy. Air superiority is the key that enables freedom of action for all joint military operations. Next is Global Integrated ISR, or GESR. That provides the decision advantage through the collection, process, dissemination, or exploitation and dissemination of tactically relevant information. GESR is the high-end function that underpins the execution of the Air Force missions and enables a joint force execution across the range of military operations. GESR conducts the first and last steps of the F2 T2 EA kill chain: the find, fix, track, and then assess. Put simply, they find our targets. Moving to the bottom right corner, Global Precision Attack provides the ability to conduct rapid, precise, and persistent attack across multiple domains anywhere across the globe against any threat. Global Precision Attack is the offensive kinetic and non-kinetic end result that the CAF supplies to the combatant commander, neutralizing targets. Last but not least, personnel recovery is exactly what you think it is: rescuing isolated personnel. Personnel recovery is dedicated to saving lives and recovering personnel in both times of peace and war. The primary mission is wartime recovery, but PR forces are extensively used during civil emergencies and natural and human disasters. During wartime, their missions include identifying and locating isolated personnel, gathering access to the rescue area, inserting the recovery forces, and extracting the isolated personnel and providing critical care during that recovery. All 5 core functions rely on available flow of information and or data free from manipulation from an authenticated source, and often the nature of that information needs to be protected from the enemy. It is this acknowledgement, our reliance on cyberspace to accomplish our core functions, that the CAF need to have a voice in cyber. What happens in cyber, where resources and people are allocated and where they're not allocated, will have direct impact to the warfighters and the other 4 domains. To help with that, I've got a short video, and I'll speak after it's complete. Note what looks like paper still flying in that screen. And as the words on the slide describe, what that was is a January strike that we had against ISIS targeting their cash reserves at one location. We've now done that many times. As you know, we've taken away a lot of their revenue-generating material. Now we went after their banks. What I love about that video is, first off, it's unclassified, so I can show it to you. That's good. Second, it's the only time that the military made money go up in smoke and we weren't yelled at by Congress. And third, we didn't have to clean up. Turns out most people that lived around there were out in the morning before sunrise picking up what was left of that money. So that worked out really well for us. In all seriousness, that video is essentially pertinent because it highlights the importance of cyber in today's fight. Every step in the kill chain for that attack, from the intelligence needed to prepare the strike, the C2 of the strike package, and the operations of that strike itself depended on cyber. First, the obvious. The links that our operators use to fly and operate remotely is a minor miracle. Through the use of satellites, ground earth stations, and IT circuits, we're able to project power to all parts of the world. That same IT structure provides the intelligence professionals the ability to collect appropriate imagery and video, turn that data into usable intelligence, find targets, and then analyze the effectiveness of our actions in near real time. However, it should come as no big surprise that cyber also enhances the back-end planning for our war efforts. It's much easier to plan and collaborate a war if the IT systems we use work. But cyber is also instrumental for many of our aircraft to merely operate. Whether it's GPS, fly-by-wire, or service, our country have leveraged cyber in a way that makes our warfighters lethal. In that same sense, though, the last thing I mentioned is most important because cyber resources, their availability and especially their integrity, become a requisite requirement to enable us to project air power. At a minimum, we need to protect those areas if the Air Force and U.S. government are going to be able to project air power against a near-peer adversary. I adapted this slide from one of Major General Wilson, the 24th Air Force Commander's presentations. I liked what he had to say, and because I'm speaking before him, I get to use it. But it needed more CAF assets on the far right, so there's some minor changes, and I want to make sure that the fuel folks got some of the love because of the base infrastructure and the effects that cyber has on them. But those are just minor changes. I stole it because it takes a complicated domain like cyber and categorizes it in a way that makes even sense to an old fighter pilot and the rest of us standing in a lunch line in the back. First on the left, we have the traditional IT network. We run a number of networks in the DoD, and as most people in the audience here are aware, each one of those networks are important. They facilitate the flow of information at all classified levels. They are a force multiplier because the number of people required to do the various functions across the Air Force and the DoD have been reduced by these network capabilities. Yet the network strength isn't an ends by itself. In a conflict, the loss of networks, especially unclassified networks, wouldn't be my biggest concern in a bullet flying contest. In the middle, we have the industrial control networks that run everything from power, water, sewage, and even to fuels, to just name a few. These systems also have the networks and automated systems in them to run more efficiently with fewer people. While the effects on industrial systems may not seem to have a direct impact on our aircraft or operations, they can and do. If we're operating in the desert environment and the AC goes out, the extreme temperatures could force our operations to move, or worse yet, shut down. If something interrupts the fuel supply lines, and it doesn't matter how capable the aircraft are, they won't be flying anywhere. Someone once said, it's just a bunch of ones and zeros, but if instead of fuel showing up, I get a bunch of tubes of toothpaste, I'm not going to be happy with that as that warfighter. So our logistics air operations must be protected. Many of our legacy SCADA, and I was told in this audience I didn't have to explain what that was, and other industrial control systems were designed to worry about the network intruders or the network attacks. Actually, some of them were designed before we even worried about networks at all. As a result, many of those traditional safeguards, standard on the internet protocol-based networks, are not in place and represent an area that needs to be addressed as well. On the right, we have our weapon systems. That's pretty self-explanatory. For the CAF, they are the air assets we put in the fight in support of the COCOM and the JFAC by accomplishing one of the Air Force's 5 core missions. The challenge we have right now as an Air Force, a challenge that General Hyten mentioned in an Afcea symposium in Colorado earlier this year, is that too many of our cyber resources go to defending those networks. 2 years ago, 90% of the Air Force resources went to just simply defending and operating those networks. Last year it was down to 85%, but it's still too much of an imbalance. There aren't enough resources left for the other areas. A highly secure network is only as good as what's connected to it. But it's a problem that's being addressed, and commanders at the highest level are continuing to look for ways to push the column to the left and make sure the industrial and weapon system supports get what they need. With the Air Force moving away from a network-centric view and resourcing communications and IT and a more weapon systems-focused view, we in the CAF are thrilled with this approach. All right, this schematic was developed by an engineer, which will lead to part of my STEM discussion a little bit. And forgive me, it's a rather busy slide. Again, it's one that I stole from General Bender, but I made it simpler. I actually took things off of the slide. But it's up here to illustrate how we think about networks today. Unsurprisingly, our concept of network architecture is driven by IT professionals. Traditionally, you will build a network diagrams with the important network sensors at the center of the diagram as we've got here. The domain controllers, they authenticate the users, manage permissions on the network, email the servers, and provide the storage devices, the internal domain, all those things that go on in the background, with the end users hanging on the end. This makes sense if the most important part of your network is the network itself. You would apply defense in depth principles to defend those network crown jewels more than the lowly end user. In other words, we would develop a Maginot line to defend the network. The problem with that traditional viewpoint from the CAS perspective is it's the end user in the Air Force networks that are the weapon systems. While network servers might be important to the network, the mission systems hanging off the end are far more important in our opinion. How we view that network defines drivers. How we view the network definitely drives how we resource and defend parts of the network. In the diagram on the left are our mission systems and the systems that are directly connected to the weapon systems. In the middle, we have the mission planning functions that enable our weapon system, ensuring that the AOC has the right network connectivity in terms of availability, confidentiality, and integrity of that data is important. And at the far right, we have the generic enterprise services where predominantly we expend most of our resources. While those network services are important, we need to ensure that other parts of the network are secured as well. At the bottom side of the slide, we back up. Okay, at the bottom side of the slide, you get a notion where the sixth community is headed. The 24th Air Force will still defend the networks on the left. Cyber protection teams and members from the Comm Squad or next will defend the mission level systems, and the individual systems will at least have cyber defenses embedded as a minimum. The network view I propose here is meant to reframe or show how we view the networks, but ultimately, this is a slide for communicators. Here's how operators view the cyber threats to our systems. This schematic's easier to understand because it was designed by an artist's view, which is kind of what most fighter pilots are. There are a number of potential ways for cyber to either enable or negatively impact our operations. Some of the potential areas are better known than others. For example, we have a history of both exploiting and defending against electronic attack in the EM, or the electromagnetic spectrum. It's constantly evolving, but the Air Force and the DoD have the organizational processes, procedures, and organizations in place to deal with this, or TTPs. EW is nothing new to the flyers, but the impact of other potential areas can affect our platforms is just starting to reach the tactical level flying. We need to actively defend ourselves against other areas as well. So moving around the circle, our platforms have an exhaustive supply chain. It's imperative that we maintain the integrity of our system as they make their way into the platform, both in terms of hardware and software. Components and subcomponents come from all over the country and the world. How do we guarantee the quality, security of the hardware replacements? The same thing applies to the software. How do we ensure that the code being developed isn't being tampered with before it's even finalized? Similarly, subsystem components potentially offer a way to limit avenues into our weapon system. Anything connected to the aircraft has the potential to be a path an adversary uses to create negative effects on our platforms. Safely putting a weapon system within striking range of its intended target does us no good if the targeting pod or the bomb has been corrupted. And yes, we do have thinking bombs. Systems that directly connect to the aircraft, systems like test and evaluation equipment and maintenance equipment, which are vital to the safe and everyday running of our weapon systems, provide another potential vector to our platforms. Perhaps the jet is fine, but if the maintenance device is erroneously recording faults, or worse, there are faults in the jet that aren't being reported, then we're going to have problems. Protecting these devices is important as well. Finally, we need to manage the air-gap media. To be sure, air-gap media does make the jet more secure than it would be otherwise, but it's not infallible. We should not take our air-gap systems defense for granted. There is one last piece of complexity at the bottom. For new platforms, there are around 25 organizations that are charged with some form of security protection and mission assurance on a single platform. Getting all of these organizations on the same page is a huge challenge. The problem is very complex. Cyber is growing at a fast rate. In the Air Force and DoD, we have limited resources which are far outstripped by the demand that we're asked. How do we prioritize properly where we defend in cyber? Where do we allocate resources, and how do we get from where we are to where we're going? How do we prioritize between defense and offense when we're in cyber? That's the big question we're struggling with now. The Air Force's answer is mission assurance. Mission assurance is a change in mindset. It's the acknowledgement that the cyberspace domain is inside of all of our warfighting and mission systems. It acknowledges that most Air Force weapons and support systems were designed to operate in a permissive cyberspace environment. But as you heard the Secretary say earlier this morning, cyberspace is increasingly becoming a contested domain. To be honest, I would say we are already at war in cyber. The presence of maneuvering enemy in cyberspace requires a much different approach. Without freedom of action in cyberspace, our ability to accomplish the 5 core functions that we are tasked with is threatened. Compliance and boundary defenses are insufficient. We must shift maneuver and fighting through in a contested environment is our effort. The assumption that systems will always be operational and unaffected by the enemy is an assumption we can no longer make. Because of this, we defend the Air Force core missions. And as you saw from the previous slides, when the CAF looks at core missions in cyber, we look from a weapon system out. Defending core missions also means changing our mindsets. We need to move from managing data to affecting commanders' decisions. That also means moving away from the 5 nines as a measure of success, because what we measure determines where we put our effort. That's human nature. Freedom of action is the ability to complete missions at will within a contested environment. It's not much different than the air domain. I don't expect cyber domain in all ports of cyber at all times, but if I need access to certain areas or a resource during a particularly important vulnerability window, I need it to happen. I also want to reemphasize that we as operators need to acknowledge what cyber professionals have and what you've known for a while. Cyber is no longer a permissive environment. This should drive movement in many areas, from how we resource our defenders, to cyber integration into operations in other domains, and to acquisition. The change in mindset available from the IT and the mission assurance is driving a lot of changes that the SIX community and Air Force Cyber are seeing. The Air Force has a lot of moving parts with implementing mission assurance, and I'm frankly not the expert to ask in many of these areas, but it sounds like they're sitting right up here at the front table, so I'll deflect questions that way. I would like to discuss some of the ACC or CAF perspective as why they are important to the air operator. Resilient C2 enables our C2, ISR, and real-time comms to get where they need to be in a contested environment. The Joint Area Layered Network provides a route back for the data traffic through the air domain and adds resiliency when it's coming off our F-35s and F-22s. The key from a CAF perspective is to make sure that the system does not give away our aircraft locations. Otherwise, our stealthy technology is just an expensive paint job. The Airborne Global Information Grid interfaces standardizes the way that our aircraft reach back into the terrestrial network. It should make defending those entry points in cyber better since the gateways will be standardized and identified. We expect better connectivity and security through this endeavor. In multi-domain operations, we must integrate air, space, and cyber together. We need cyber operators and planners that can mitigate the risk and plan right alongside their air and space counterparts. We need experienced people to identify and mitigate the defensive risks, communicate operational risks, and explain what is tactically possible for commanders across all domains. Putting these folks side by side in the right capacity has a potentially huge payoff as we move forward. Planners need to realize that the portion of a sortie might fill air superiority requirements, a portion might cover space requirements, and another portion cyber. Cyber, whether kinetic operations or non-kinetic ops, has quickly become an equal part of creating effects for all commanders. If I can get an enemy defense to look away from my aircraft through cyber means, well, who wouldn't consider that? If I asked an F-15 planner, he may give me an air superiority solution, where an F-22 planner may give me a slightly different picture, and standing next to them should be a cyber planner who would alter it yet again, and the solution is probably a combination of all three. The MAJCOM Cyberspace Control Center, or MCCC, is being stood up at ACC to help provide better situational awareness and integration across the air and cyber domains. The idea is to provide commanders in both context and SA to make appropriate risk decisions. The MCCC will be the go-between for bases in the cyber world. It will relay indications and warning and help prioritize defensive measures. They will work with vendors to provide a better defensive posture and relay back to our cyber organizations the risk wing commanders are making. As acquisition figures out how to better incorporate cyber defenses into the acquisition process is improving. We need better requirements from the government and better interoperability from industry. That's our Open Mission Systems initiative. Once cyber defense becomes an integral part of our standards, it will be something that we always do. We had a similar problem in the past with devices being tampered. Before we had requirements for anti-tamper, the risk of tampered equipment was much more baked into the design and not bolted on later, which is more expensive. This should also help our community be honest about the true costs of cyber defense for new systems, since we won't be shifting that cost into the future. Cyber defense and our cyber communications professionals will have to conduct CAF, will have to support the CAF in the cyber domain. This is something that General Hyten and Lieutenant General Bender's folks are really working through right now. We need the organized, trained, and equipped, and organizationally empowered cyber operators to defend our key cyber terrain. It is that simple. The Air Force has already created dedicated cyber warfares that can surge and work in the F2TA cyber domain. These are the experts the Air Force has right now, but the CAF acknowledges that they are a high-demand, low-density force. There are other important competing solutions for us to include the AMC's systems and the space systems as well. Still, the CPTs represent a bridging solution that we can shift more of our manpower to base infrastructure and weapon systems and subsystems. Com Squadron next. The Air Force looks at we need a bigger presence in a base infrastructure and weapon systems. The solution is Com Squadron next, which represents the transition away from the communication squadrons of today and how they are organized and where cyber IT professionals need to go tomorrow. Today we have a manpower shortfall defending our core missions in cyber terrain. Approximately 85% defend the AFNets. This will hopefully help move some of that manpower of defending systems closer to the weapon systems. How will we get there is a challenge. Where do we find the resources to accomplish the network sustainment roles for comm squadrons today? And where are the lines of demarcation between the 24th Air Force and the comm squadron next? Will the cyber organization be a wing or a flight or a squadron? These are the problems that the Air Force is working through right now, and time will tell. But for the CAF, it all comes down to defending our platforms. It is with this lens that we judge all proposals in cyber. For all of those initiatives, we have or will have a partner with industry to get where we need to go. Moving forward, we'll once again, like we always have, partner with industry to help solve some of the most challenging problems our service and departments face. As mentioned earlier, the Air Force plans to transition IT services to private providers in order to free up manpower for other cyber requirements. We still haven't worked out the resourcing bit, and the CAF won't be the driving in that initiative, but it's where the Air Force is moving, and we'll need private industry to be a solid partner for that transition. It's a part of our Bending the Cost Curve initiative that you heard earlier. For education and training, the Air Force has some of its best IT professionals in the world, but our collective knowledge base on the cyber terrain and on our weapon system is more limited than we would require. We need our blue suit cyber knowledge base on that proprietary systems to increase. For that to happen, we'll need quality training that is quickly scalable, and we'll need continuing education opportunities for these fantastic airmen. Here is where our Guard and Reserve teams really shine. Imagine hiring a computer executive by day and a cyber warrior by night and weekend. For automated tools and data aggregation, our systems get more IT reliant, and the amount of data will grow exponentially. We need a way for our cyber defenders in these newly developed comm squadrons to be able to sift through the data and identify the areas of concern. Sifting through a number of the sensor inputs and finding areas to focus on is an incredible challenge, unless we have some automated tools to help our defenders. That's part of our machine-to-machine initiative. We have them on the traditional IT side of the house. Do we have them near our weapon systems? If not, we need it. It'll be part of our autonomous learning systems that will help us in the future. Network defense is traditional network. On the traditional network is more mature than the cyber defense on our platforms. There are a lot of strategies and lessons learned from the cat and mouse game, and that's been happening between the network defenders and attackers for a long time. We need to transfer those lessons learned to the defensive techniques to our weapon systems. This will enable us to get at Secretary James's human-machine collaboration effort. There will come a day when this great nation will have a fight on its hands with a truly existential threat. That's a big word for a fighter pilot. At that time, our cyber operators will need to have access and knowledge to the systems that they are working on. Training that will provide our airmen the ability to fight, but before they can train, they need to ensure they have the appropriate access to the systems that they're working on. I know that might be controversial to some here in the audience, but the business model right now is that the Air Force is relying on contractors for day-to-day operations of certain subcomponents, yet when the weapons fly and we need to forward deploy some of these aircraft, our trained airmen will have to go forward, and it all starts with their access. Developing interoperable standards is another initiative that some in the audience may not like to hear. Again, it challenges some business models, but we need to develop interoperable standards. It's a problem that transcends the platform type and the mission area. For too long, we've been backwards engineering solutions to force compatibility between systems that were designed as standalone operations, even two different systems made by the same company. Since the Air Force formally adopted the Open Mission System Initiative on the 30th of April of 2014, several of our leading industry partners have signed on to publish system architecture standards for major mission systems. To those partners, thank you. This is a huge step in the right direction because it allows us to plan for interoperability and take more of our systems engineering approach and design. It encourages competition by reducing sole source contracting, which in turn will drive down costs. I realize again that for some people in this room, they may not see eye to eye on this point, but competition really is a good thing. It doesn't just drive down costs, it also fuels innovation and advances technology at a far greater pace than would otherwise be achievable. Finally, the Open Mission Systems approach allows the Air Force to get the best value throughout the life cycle of the mission system, not just in the initial purchase. Based on the success of this approach, the Air Force is expanding the concept to an increasingly wide range of capabilities. We are a technology-dependent force. In today's increasingly interconnected world, that is both a key to our dominance and a potentially devastating vulnerability. I'll leave you with one last thought. The CAF is a demanding customer. We want the technology you provide us, and we want the Air Force, and that the Air Force acquires to improve our operations, so we need it to be good. We want it yesterday, and we want it faster. We want lots of it. The bombs, the planes, the sensors, so it needs to be cheap. It's a classical problem that exists in cyber as well. We don't want to spend a lot of money, but we want our systems secured, and when there's an issue, it needs to be resolved immediately. Yes, we are a demanding customer, and we know that. But our ability to establish and maintain air and space superiority, conduct effective C2, provide the DoD with ISR, and conduct precision attack anywhere in the globe, and conduct personnel recovery, all 5 of ACC's primary missions, all depend on cyber capabilities that are secure, available, and they will start with our platforms and still be financially viable. That's a huge challenge we're working through right now in ACC and the larger Air Force. How we work through this challenge and opportunity with industry and the DoD will go a long way in determining our success in this domain. I'd like to once again thank General Shea and Wood and Afcea for having us here today and providing the chance to speak. The work Afcea does in advocating and supporting the development of the STEM is wonderful, appreciated, and it's definitely needed. The Air Force has always been a technologically advanced force. Our future depends on the demonstrated acumen and continued innovation of STEM professionals like you. Thank you for your time, and I think we'll bring up the slide if there are any questions that shows how to get there.
Thank you, sir. Could you describe the growth of cyber and electronic warfare planning activities in the Air Force CAOC? Is there enough integration across domains, air, space, sea, ground, regarding cyber activities in pursuit of strike missions?
Okay. Our initial effort in the AOC is an air operations center. So it doesn't really get to the cyber and the space. So what we do is we bolt on the side of that, for example, a space, what we call a Director of Space Forces, or a DIR Space 4, just like we do for mobility, a DIR Mob 4. Our initial effort with cyber is going to be intentionally baked into the plan up front, but because we're not acting fast enough and we don't have enough of the experts that are sitting here at the table, part of 24th and 25th Air Force, we're going to also have a DIR Cyber 4 in our AOCs. We'll know we get it right 5-10 years from now when cyber is just part of that plan and it's one of the planners that are on the staff, part of the operators that are on the floor, instead of having to have that added to the side of it or afterthought. So that's where we're headed. It's going to take us a little while to get there, but that also gets at the resources and the manpower. Cyber is a growing mission, and all other missions rely on it. So thanks. Great question. Did I get that right?
Thank you.
Sure.
F-35 is being touted as an ISR network node as much as or more than traditional strike fighter. So much so, flight lines and hangars are being limited to classified access at a level never seen before. Can you address what impacts this might have from an ACC perspective, deployed limitations, technical maintenance perspective?
Repeat the question. You said Five Eyes are getting the access like they never had, or they're being denied the access?
F-35 is being touted as an ISR network node as much as or more than traditional strike fighter, so much so that flight lines and hangars are being limited to classified access at a level never seen before. Can you discuss the impacts?
Yep. The F-35 is a combat system, but we're finding that as we're approaching IOC with the weapon system, that it is a vacuum, much like some of our other ISR collectors. And our intent is to put several hundred of them out over the battlefield at any one time. That drives a huge volume of data that our cyber and intelligence specialists are going to have to sift through. So that immediately, that starts happening right there in the flight line, which is driving those security classifications that we talked about. The benefit is our Five Eyes partners, those that are closest to us and really work together with us and are part of that F-35 program, have the access that they need. So we share those hangars. And the airplane starts downloading that information, some of it real time while it's flying, some of it as soon as you land, others when it pulls back in and shuts down. So part of that air gap that we talked about, kind of like a Wi-Fi approach in some of it, it will get messy in that it is a lot of classified information, but anybody that's a partner with the F-35 has that access. And matter of fact, they're part of the backbone of our success. So whether our partners are in Asia, such as Japan, buying the airplane, or our European allies that are supporting it, it'll meet the needs that they're looking for. So thank you. Good question.
What technology or technologies specifically would add the most capabilities to ACC's current fleet of platforms? Any examples on your shopping or Christmas list?
Probably that machine-to-machine ability to transfer awareness, because as we just talked about with the F-35, a great collector, imagine an RC-135 rivet joint that is packed in the back end with fantastic linguists and intel specialists and operators that take all that information in and reducing all of that to a single person or a single pilot, because every F-35 that is being made is a single seat. That's what we're looking at, is we need a way to present all of that information to one person and make it an awareness adder, not a detractor, where it becomes an eye magnet or is just information overload and we can no longer function with that. I'll be honest, that's one of the strengths of the current generation that's growing up. Young kids today, and I don't mean that poorly, our lieutenants and our staff sergeants are really motivated people, and they have grown up with things in their hands that were games, telephones, those types of things. So my son is a lieutenant flying in the Air Force. He can watch TV, he can text to 5 or 6 people and still work his computer at the same time and not really miss a beat. Now, he may not be best in the verbal communication, but I know where that comes from. So that's one of the things that he and I work on, and he texts so fast that I actually will pick up the phone and call him rather than trying to, the next text is already coming in while I'm still trying to respond to the second one, let alone the first one is there. And he won't answer the phone, and I know he's there because he's texting me. And he'll, Dad, I was texting 4 other people. If I talk to you on the phone, I can't text with them, and I have to end that conversation. So no, I don't have time for that. Well, those are the people that are coming into our Air Force now and all our services that provide that capability and capacity that if we can get them the information in a manageable format, that they will just do great and wonderful things with the services and the products and the weapon systems that we're providing. So that machine-to-machine collaboration of putting it into that format that allows them to take that information in is probably my biggest on the wish list.
You mentioned a permissive environment. Can you define what you mean by that?
Okay, permissive environment, when it comes to airspace, and such as air superiority, means that we can go in and do the mission that we need to do free of significant enemy interaction. I would treat that the same in cyberspace, that I need to have access to the tools and equipment that I need to go out and have that same operation, which means the networks have to be functioning, or at least the particular path that I need to use for engagement X or operation Y. And our ability to use those tools can't be compromised, so we haven't been using them on a regular basis, because once you use a tool, then it's there for everybody to see and dissect. So by permissive, we mean that we have the freedom to maneuver in cyberspace just as we fight for it in air and in space itself. So cyber is a contested environment. We have to continue to work through that, and that means we need to have that backbone already in place, not build it when the war comes. I think we have time for one more question, because the rest of those fighter pilots are eating your lunch.
How well is planning for information dominance actions and activities integrated with the offensive and defensive initiatives described by Secretary James this morning? What is ACC doing to make this integration happen?
Well, as I said, we're just a voting member or somebody kind of on the periphery, because ACC on the physical side and the operational side on the CAF We are just one of those players in that environment. We agree with the effort to put less than 85% of our resources, both manpower and people, on the operating the network and pushing more of that into a public-public or a public-private type of a venue and allow someone else to do that for us so that our warriors can go out and get the mission done. For that reason, as soon as you make this simple, because that's hard to do that, saying, well, you can let somebody else operate your networks. Well, I let somebody build the roads to the base that lead to that power projection platform. They ought to do the same thing for this so that we can go out and just do that mission. So I think we're headed in the right direction, reducing it and putting more of the warfighter capability and the strengths of the team sitting up here on this table away from just simply operating the network to defending it where we need to and going out and breaking things on the other end when it's time to go out and initiate our offense. So I think we're headed in the right direction, and you guys are a big part of that, allowing it or enabling that with your tools. So again, thanks for having me here. I look forward to seeing you in lunch if there's any of it left.